Hey friends, Ash here with Gents with another fragrance review. Today I'm taking a look at the new Boss the Scent flanker, Hugo Boss the Scent Absolute. This is going to follow up the original and all the flankers that came before this. So the original the Scent Intense, the Scent Parfum Edition, and the Scent Private Accord. This is a fragrance that I bought as a tester, just like the last review I did, so there's going to be no box in the presentation portion of this video. I'm going to break this fragrance down, let you know what I think about it, let you know how it comes across to me, and let you know how this stacks up against the original and all the flankers that came before this one. So let's go ahead and jump into this and check out the Scent Absolute. Like I said, I bought this as a tester because yes, I was being cheap. The tester version of this was actually like $15, $20 less than the full presentation version, and I decided to save a little bit of money because ultimately I don't really care about the box all that much. It's nice to have if it's a really nice presentation, but if it's just your standard run-of-the-mill box, it just gets put up and then never seen again. So why spend an extra $15 or $20 for a little piece of cardboard? At least that's the way I viewed it. If you're interested in the box though, here's a picture of it. Looks great, right? Let's go ahead and take a quick look at this bottle. Here we go, Hugo Boss the Scent Absolute. The bottle is the exact same design as all the others in the line. The main difference is going to be the coloration of the metal used in the bottle. Here it comes across a little bit more like a bronze. As you can see here, it does say the scent around the neck of the bottle, which is something it has in common with all the others in the line. And on the bottom here, it's going to be your sticker with your batch code. Atomizer on this is fine. I'll go ahead and waste a couple sprays for you guys. There we go. I do that every time and it just hits me right in the face. The opening of the Scent Absolute is bright, it's fresh, it's got a good amount of ginger in there. It also has what comes across to me like an almost syruped orange and cinnamon, though the only official top note is ginger. And this is a fragrance that's kept really simple as far as the official note breakdown. It has 4 notes. It has ginger in the top, Meninka and Mondia root in the mid, and then vetiver in the base. That's it. So while it does come across a little bit like a syruped mandarin orange with some cinnamon spice in the opening, those are not official notes. That's just how it comes across to me when I smell this one. Hugo Boss actually describes the ginger in this fragrance coming across like a lemony, spicy ginger. And that's a decent way to describe the way it comes across, though to me, it's a little more orangey than it is lemony. At least how I'm used to smelling lemon in fragrances and how I'm used to smelling orange in fragrances. The opening in the Scent Absolute does have a lot in common with some of the fragrances that have come before it, more specifically the Scent Eau de Toilette and the Scent Intense. The Scent Parfum Edition does something completely different. The way it opens up is absolutely nothing like Absolute, and Private Accord, leaning more on the cacao and coffee, is a little more different than Absolute as well. And while this isn't the same as the original The Scent or the Scent Intense, to me, it shares a little more in common with these two than it does Parfum Edition or Private Accord. After this is sat on your skin for about 10 minutes, the Meninka fruit starts to come out a lot more strongly. And once the Meninka fruit comes out in this fragrance, it stays that way, a very prominent note, I should say, all the way through the dry down. It's got that familiar dustiness to it, which you'll find in most all of the scent fragrances. The Meninka fruit gives off a dusty, exotic fruit kind of sweetness. The way that Hugo Boss describes it as a rum fruity sweetness. So they're saying it comes across a little bit boozy. That's the way that I take it. If you've smelled the scent fragrances, you're going to know how that Meninka smells, because it's such a prominent note in each one of these. So when it starts to creep out here in Absolute, you're gonna pick it up right away. There's also that Mondia root that I talked about a little bit before. That's in the mid. It provides more depth to the fragrance and it gives it kind of a vanilla type scent, like a semi-powdery vanilla in the mid. So you've got this dusty Meninka, then a semi-powdery vanilla. Thankfully though, in the mid, the fruity sweetness that the Meninka also has kind of acts as a counter to the dustiness and the powderiness. So it makes it more appealing, comes across a lot nicer than if you didn't have that counterbalance of that fruity sweetness. In the mid, it's spicy, sweet, dusty, powdery, and just the tiniest touch earthy, and it really is a tiny touch. It's not something that you'll pick up each time that you smell it, and you really have to kind of search it out. My wife actually, when she smelled this, thought that it had patchouli in it. That's the first thing that came to her mind. She said, oh, this smells like there's patchouli somewhere in there. Again, patchouli, not an official note, but I imagine that's the kind of little touch of earthiness. She was picking that up and interpreting that as patchouli. I talked for a second about how Hugo Boss says that the Meninka fruit in the scent Absolute is a rum fruity note, so it's got kind of a boozy feel to them. To me, it doesn't really come off that way necessarily. I don't pick up booze from this scent. I will say though that it does have a kind of multifaceted sweetness, which I alluded to before, with the fruity sweetness and then that vanillic kind of powdery sweetness, and then the dust that you'll find in Meninka as a note. And that multifaceted approach to the sweetness in the fragrance, especially through the mid and specifically through the mid, makes it a very, very appealing, very nice smelling fragrance through the mid of the scent. My wife actually is a big fan of this fragrance through the mid. To her, she says it comes across masculine, comes across very pleasant, and not too sweet. So just the right amount of sweetness. To me personally, it's not the kind of scent that I smell and say, oh, that smells super masculine. Usually that's reserved for, you know, leather fragrances, your more rough and tumble kind of scents. But I do get where she's coming from. In the dry down, the scent Absolute has a little bit of a tonka-like sweetness to it, tonka bean. I imagine that's supposed to be coming from the Mondia root, or it could just be another unlisted note. You know, there could be tonka in here, they just haven't listed it as an official note. The Meninka fruit is still there in the dry down of the scent Absolute, but the longer it stays on your skin, we're talking about hours in, it starts to fade away. And that dustiness from the mid, from the Meninka, that is retained as well through the dry down. And interestingly enough, vetiver is the only listed note in the base, like I talked about before, but vetiver does not come through strongly in this scent at all. And truth be told, until you get into the far dry down, and I'm talking 3+ hours in at that point, vetiver may as well not be there at all. This is gonna sound a little bit weird, but when you're in the dry down, like let's say you've had it on an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that, if you smell where you sprayed this fragrance on and you keep smelling it, that's when you'll actually pick up the vetiver. I know, it sounds weird, but if you do something like this and take a really big smell, the first thing that you'll pick up is gonna be that kind of tonka and Meninka mix going on. There also smells like there's a little bit of amber wood or something along those lines, kind of an ambroxan woody base. Again, another unlisted note, but the vetiver, you'll actually pick that up after you get past that tonka, after you get past that Meninka, after you get past that kind of woodiness that it has. And when I say woodiness, I don't mean the vetiver. The vetiver here comes across like a dry vetiver. That's when you'll pick it up, the vetiver. After you breathe in really deeply, it's like you'll register those notes first, the tonka, Meninka, the woodiness. And then after all that, you catch just this little fleeting hint of vetiver. And there's such a small amount of it to my nose, it's almost like a mirage when you pick it up. And it leaves me questioning why they put that as the only note in the base of the fragrance, because you would think it would be a very big focal point of the scent. Maybe a rich, earthy vetiver, just right there in the base, kind of giving it some oomph, but it's not really there to me. And I should mention about that amberwood, again, not an official listed note. I've talked about amberwood in the past on the channel. It's super popular nowadays in designer releases. Basically, again, a very simple way to break that down is it comes across like a woodier take on ambroxan. So it's an ambroxan type note. It accomplishes the same things, just with more of a woody feeling. The scent Private Accord, this one, had amberwood in the base. And that's where I'm picking up kind of a similarity. Just the amberwood that was used here in Private Accord smells like it might be here in Absolute as well. Again, just not listed. As I said, in the dry down, the scent Absolute does have what I pick up to be tonka. It could be that Mondia root, which gives kind of a vanillic feel in the mid. But even with that sweetness in the dry down, this one never veers into sugary sweet territory. The sweetness here is always tempered by the Meninka, the dustiness of the Meninka, and the spice that you'll pick up. Now, as far as putting this one up against the previous The Scent fragrances, I had said in my first impression of this fragrance that I thought that you could probably replace the Eau de Toilette and the Scent Intense with the Scent Absolute, but that Private Accord and the Parfum Edition kind of stood alone. And I still feel that way. I feel like Private Accord and Parfum Edition are the two best in the entire line. I still think that. I still think that these are better than the Scent Absolute, but I think the Scent Absolute is better than the Eau de Toilette and better than the Scent Intense. So that means out of the 5 fragrances currently in the Scent line for men, the 5 main releases here, that this one is right in the middle. I think the best part of the Scent Absolute is actually going through the mid, because that's when the Meninka has its rum, fruity sweetness, and that's when it smells the best, because it provides much more of a counterbalance to the dustiness and the little bit of powder that you pick up in the mid. And once that Meninka fruit starts to kind of fade away, or at least the sweet parts of the Meninka fruit start to fade away, it loses a little bit of the intrigue that it has. That's when it's most appealing. That's actually my wife's favorite part of the fragrance as well, when it goes through the mid, and I've got to say I agree with her. Once you hit the dry down, it's mainly a dusty tonka with little bits of amberwood and the tiniest touch of vetiver and the residual Meninka. I will say that if you're a fan of the scent line, that I'd be really surprised if you didn't like the Scent Absolute. And as I said, I think you could basically take this and replace the Eau de Toilette and the Scent Intense, because the Scent Absolute is a little bit more interesting to me, and the mid is just better than any part of the Eau de Toilette or the Intense. The opening, the mid, the dry down, none of the parts of those fragrances smell as nice, at least to me, and again my wife, as the mid of Absolute does. Now let's talk about performance on the Scent Absolute. It is actually really solid. Easily lasts over 6 hours on my skin, closer to the 8-hour range, so I would put that firmly in above average territory. Projection also above average for me for the first hour and a half or so, and even as it settles in closer to the skin, it still does project decently well. This isn't the kind of fragrance that after an hour and a half it sits right next to your skin. You can still pick it up pretty easily, even 2.5, 3 hours in. Now at that point it's not projecting heavily or anything like that, but you can still pick up wafts of it. In terms of seasons when you would wear this, it's going to be mainly a fall fragrance for me, though easily worn in winter as well. As long as it's cool weather or cold weather, I think you can pull it off easily. It does lean a little more as a nighttime fragrance for me, though again, as long as the weather or the situation works, I would wear it in daytime with no issues. The scent line in general, I think it's overlooked sometimes for potential formal uses. I think you could pull this off, the Scent Absolute, pretty easily formally. Again, because the sweetness is kept in check a little bit by the dustiness and some of that powder or maybe tiny touches of earth or woods as the fragrance goes on, so it never becomes cloying, it never becomes sugary sweet or anything like that off my skin. And it does have a bit of a unique feel in comparison to most of its designer contemporaries because of that Meninka fruit. So it could set you apart from what other people are wearing. For those reasons, I think it could work really well as a formal fragrance. Obviously, you could wear it casually just as easily. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for my take on Hugo Boss, the Scent Absolute. It's a solid release. I really like how it smells. My wife really likes how it smells as well. But I do still place that behind Private Accord and the Parfum Edition. But to me, definitely better than the Eau de Toilette and the Intense. Like I said earlier, it's right in the middle. All right, guys, if you've smelled that one, let me know in the comments below what you think about it. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for all your support. I'll see you guys again tomorrow with another fragrance video. See you guys.